stripping away from the individual investor who has contracted with a major funds manager, Vanguard, PIMCO, whoever it may be, and taking away the right of private property to manage your asset and make choices about that asset. To take this away for a dubious outcome is simply, to me, a contradiction of what it is that we are about in this country. We are not about the serendipitous confiscation of private property for an uncertain outcome. We are very, very careful at law and in ethics about what we do with respect to people's property. So fundamentally, I think the concept of eminent domain as the basis for a condemnation is a functionally and ethically and legally failed concept that ought not to see the light of day.
Julia, did you want to add something? Hold on.
Yeah, just a couple of things. So I think a bit of legal expertise can be a little helpful at this particular juncture, right? And so people are much more familiar, it seems, with the use of eminent domain to take land than they are with the use of eminent domain to take intangibles, right? But the fact is the case law is abundant out there, and indeed it's abundantly cited in the white paper of mine. It seems to get cited a lot these days in connection with this proposal. That eminent domain can, and indeed often is used to take various forms of intangible property, including things very much like mortgage loans. So corporate debt has been taken, corporate equities have been taken, intellectual property has been taken, going concern values of businesses have been taken, even sports franchises, not the team members, not their jerseys, but the teams as entities, as legal entities have been taken. You don't see a drawing up of capital in this connection, right? It's not as though we have a problem in the country with insufficient capitalization of our business firms just because corporate stocks have been taken before. By the same token, the fact that real estate has been taken, actual physical land has been taken, doesn't make it impossible to buy land, right? Capital for the purposes of lending to people who want to buy land is not dried up. So basically, eminent domain risk is widely understood by market participants and is routinely priced in to the cost of credit in all of these spheres. The only sense in which what we're talking about today is different is that it's just yet another kind of intangible property that is now being looked at, right? Many other kinds already have. The question then becomes, all right, well, do we have to worry about this happening again and again and again? And no, I think the answer is no, because this is actually a kind of once-in-a-lifetime sort of situation, right? When you have a massive housing bubble of the kind that we had, with then massive drops in value of homes nationwide, to the point where you suddenly get a glut of 12 million or more underwater mortgage loans. That doesn't happen every day. And so the idea that you would use an extraordinary measure to deal with an extraordinary problem is A, not terribly surprising, and B, doesn't have any particular implications for the likelihood of people now worrying for the rest of their lives that the sky is going to fall because the government's going to take their wives and children next, right? I just don't think that's a serious concern. Sort of relatedly, it's not as though an absence of capital or inexpensive capital has been a significant problem within this country or worldwide of late, right? And indeed, the underpricing of capital for purposes of buying homes, as Neela mentioned before, was itself the fueler of the housing price bubble. So I don't think that we've got a serious concern here that we have to worry about as far as the long term is concerned when it comes to credit availability. And then finally, the last point I suppose would be to say, look, if that were a problem, it's already occurred, right? Because now people are talking about this, right? Insofar as people didn't contemplate this as a possibility in the past and therefore didn't price it into the cost of credit, the cost of capital, that's no longer going to be the case because that cat is out of the bag. Everybody's talking about eminent domain. Suddenly people are learning that, gosh, yes, it routinely is used to take intangible property, including various forms of securities. And so presumably, no matter what we do now, whether San Bernardino goes ahead and moves forward or not, whether Chicago does, whether Detroit does, whether Suffolk County does, or any of the other many cities that are currently looking at plans like this, whether they go forward with these plans or not, everybody knows that it's conceptually on the cards. It always was. Some people might not have been aware of it. Now everybody's aware of it. You're not likely to have then any change in credit conditions on the basis of somebody's actually doing it because the idea is out there, everybody knows it could be done, and if people are going to be pricing credit against that backdrop, they're going to be starting to do that right. They're going to be starting to do that right now because it's now in the air. Everybody knows about it.
I just wanted to add also and ask Bob to answer the question I posed, but uncertainty does stop the flow of credit, and we've seen that throughout the economy. So anything that stops the flow of mortgage credit should be really considered whether it's worth it. And eminent domain may stop that flow because we don't know the probability that a local municipality would act upon its right of eminent domain and exactly what they would target. But the question I wanted to re-propose to you is what happens to the mortgages once they're pulled out of the mortgage pools? Are they securitized? Are they held in whole loan form? And how do you manage the credit risk tied to those mortgages?
Right. So the basic, I mean, it would vary from town to town, right, or from municipality to municipality, depending on the particular plan that the particular municipality decided to adopt. But the basic idea would be those who currently hold the whole loans would receive fair value for them. So they would get money for loans, right, loans that they currently can't sell, right?
No.
And then those
once they're owned, that's the question.
Yeah, right. So once,
Totally wrong.
once the municipalities take, right, those particular mortgage loans, those loans are extinguished and replaced by new loans.
Excuse
That's what
me,
refinance
this is
does.
just not something to be sanguine about. This is deceptive. You promised us some legal knowledge, which was interesting for itself, but it was irrelevant. The comparison, first of all, your statement that it has always been known, or the specter of eminent domain over mortgages has always been out there, is absolutely specious nonsense. We must have a whole lot of idiots in this country supervising the securities industry in terms of what it is that must be disclosed to investors, because not one prospectus has ever disclosed eminent domain risk to one investor anywhere. So the Securities Exchange Commission must need a lot of education. The comparison of mortgages to real estate is preposterous. The characterization that mortgages are commonly and easily valued is preposterous. It's not. Why is it that every market-making firm on this earth invests millions of dollars in mortgage prepayment models to assist itself to gain advantage over others? Because there is no agreement. Mortgages are deceptively complex, and you know that because of the prepayment option. So this is just talk for a concept that does not work, will not work, and should not work because it constitutes the picking of pockets of honest people who have saved money for their education, for their retirement, etc. Sorry for the
I suspected that back and forth could continue, but I would like to give the audience an opportunity to ask the panel some questions. Is there anyone who'd like to pose a question to the panel here? This gentleman has his hand up first.
Yeah, Jeff of Congressman Don Campbell's office. People talk about private money coming in to fund because San Bernardino clearly doesn't have the money to do this on its own. Can someone identify who has signed up to be the private investor to come in and offer the first dollar? And that is, it's kind of a follow-up that are related to if this keeps going on. Once we went through the PLMBS pools and say we're going to go into the GSC, the conforming loans, if these loans have been substituted out of the pools, isn't the American taxpayer going to stand behind its government guarantee on the agency MBS or the agency bonds that it's sold in the market already?
If you look at MRP's plan documents that are out there, very clearly the United States taxpayer will be the one funding this program. The point of the MRP program is to take loans from private label trusts. And again, going back to the analogy that the math that moderator put out earlier is if you, let's say a mortgage is $100,000 is the appraised value of the house. The principal balance of the mortgage is $150,000. MRP proposal is a fair market value would be $85,000 or $80,000, $70,000, whatever they believe they can get as fair market value. If it's sold out of the trust at that number, the plan that MRP is, and this is in black and white from MRP, is that they would refinance that loan into an FHA loan. That would be the takeout. So they would be using the government to seize, I would use the word steal, the loan on the front end, and then they'll use the government again to refinance the loan on the back end. It's an ingenious plan to make a lot of money, but ultimately that's what fails with the constitutional test, is because by making a lot of money, they clearly aren't paying fair market value.
And that's assuming that those loans get refinanced. My point is, what if they're just modified? What do you do with them if they can't be refinanced into an FHA loan?
Another question you'd like to ask? Go ahead.
You posed it in the beginning, and I don't think that we really had a legitimate answer. I don't know if it's impossible to give an answer, but at the current sort of proposition in Robert's white paper, would it work? Yes, no, or we really honestly can't?
It sounds, it's the reason I asked it. I'm not sure that it's an easy question to answer, but I'll rephrase it for the panel. So let's say, and Neil, you just touched on this, let's say San Bernardino County begins to use eminent domain as a tactic for principal reduction and is able, in the vast majority of cases or every case, to refi into an FHA loan. Would it have the desired effect? I mean, I don't know who to turn to here on the panel. Tim wants to answer the question, but would it have the desired effect on San Bernardino? Remember, we're talking here about public officials who are trying to make decisions for the benefit of their constituents. Would it have the desired effect, forget about the investors for a second, on San Bernardino County? Would it work?
Let me answer that.
How can you forget the investors?
No,
That's
no,
absurd.
no, I'm not.
That's absurd.
I'm trying to isolate the question.
It's
We
an economic
consider-
question. It's not a moral question.
I'm
If
trying to break it
if
into
you're Robin
into two parts because we've considered at length the impact on investors, and I'm not dismissing that for a moment. I'm just trying to go back to the question that the folks at the county, the county office of San Bernardino are wrestling with right now.
When you
And
say-
Laurie wants to answer
When you
the question.
say, will it work, the question is, will it help solve the housing problem in San Bernardino? So
I know it's not an easy question to answer, but
and
effectively
the
that's
answer
it, yes.
is that you are actually dealing, that by the time you get done cherry picking the loans, you are actually dealing with so few loans that it will be incredibly profitable to the MRP investors, but it will do little for the overall housing situation at a huge cost in terms of future credit availability.
Sorry, Laurie.
I think the question's a little different. To me, it's will it work at what cost? And
So
that's
you're
why
going
the
to
cost
cost-benefit
benefit.
analysis.
Yeah, will it work at what cost? And are there
That's where
less
it got bogged down earlier.
costly alternatives like hand downs, like this blind trust that was proposed by an economics professor and a lawyer, a law professor, in which you can actually use a blind trust to pool the interests of investors within a mortgage security and do what's best for mortgage holders by doing targeted principal reduction that makes sense. So what are the alternatives out there that give local municipalities power and work? And I think that the cost of any solution is just as important as whether it works.
Why do local municipalities need power over pre-existing mortgage contracts?
Because we have spent 10% of TARP money through federal channels. And real estate is local. Local municipalities may be, in terms of solving this crisis, because the government, we can't ignore the elephant in the room
The TARP initiative is expired. That money is unavailable for other uses.
So 6 years after the crisis, we spent 10% of it.
And it's a damn shame. There were a lot of things that could have been done early on that were.
So we can't ignore the fact that still be done without money. We can't ignore the fact that government is a huge part of the housing industry. You can't ignore it. You can't get around it. It's a fact, right? And so as long as that's a fact, we have to look at all parts of government, from federal to local, because all parts of government are impacted by and therefore impact the housing situation. So if we really want to fix the problems with our states and our municipalities that are struggling because of the housing crisis, then we should look at local solutions. And that's all I am advocating. Not necessarily a particular one, but it's okay to examine solutions, look at costs and benefits, and lead action. And I say this not as an investor in mortgage trust security.